Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Theodore, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
So we open up at the Great Ocean Dock, where the tugs are gathering for the morning work meeting. And every Monday, the dispatcher gives out the important jobs of the week to each of the tugs. With that being said, this week Theodore is to be in charge of welcoming all the new ships. Theodore is surprised to be given such an important job, as he's never done it before. Go figure. And judging by the look on his face, seems like this will be a new learning experience for Theodore, yet again.
Hello, Mr. or Mrs. Special Visiting Ship. Welcome to our harbor. I hope you like it here because it's nice. Because it's nice? Did that sound right? Theodore wondered, what should he say? The loud blast was from George, who was on his way to work with Hank. What are you doing? Asked George. I'm practicing my welcome, replied Theodore. Welcomes are easy, said George. You just say, hello. This is the second biggest ice-free harbor in the whole entire world. And with that, George let out a big, long blast of his horn. A big blast from my horn, thought Theodore. I wonder, is that the best way to welcome?
That line always had me puzzled. If the Big Harbor is the second biggest ice-free harbor, then what's the first? These are questions I wish we could have answers to. But anyway, to make better sure of himself, Theodore asks Emily what she thinks is the right way to welcome.
Emily, called Theodore, what's the right way to welcome? Visiting ships like to see interesting things, replied Emily. I always tell them about the family of whales who sometimes visit the rocky cove. That's different from what George said, Theodore thought to himself. I wonder which is really the right way to welcome.
Is that really all the visiting ships want to see? There's plenty of other things in the harbor you could show them. Moving on from that, with this puzzling question still lingering on Theodore's mind, he then asks Fodok's take on welcoming.
Fodok, what's the right way to welcome? You simply say, replied Fodok, that our harbor is the safest harbor in the world, and we have the most fire extinguishers. And then, he added, I do this. Fodok shot out a great spray with his firefighting hose. Another way to welcome, groaned Theodore to himself. But which welcome was the right welcome?
Jeez, 3 welcomes? That's enough to drive you up a wall, don't you think? But continuing, the next day Theodore is given an important job to go and welcome a submarine named Northumberland. The submarine had been under the water for 3 months and was in the harbor to rest. First off, what was Northumberland doing under the water for 3 whole months? And also, did anyone notice that the footage used for the dispatcher is exactly what they used for Homesick Rowboat in the beginning? This now kind of proves my theory that this episode more than likely came before Rowboat. Continuing on, when Theodore arrives at the Navy Yard, he searches all over for the submarine, but can't seem to find it.
Then the fog parted a little, and he saw something that looked like a monster shark, all made of metal. Yikes! He shouted in surprise. But then he saw a name on the side of the strange thing. Sure enough, it said Northumberland. Theodore floated a little closer to the silent giant. He was so nervous his anchor was rattling. Hello, Mr. More-Thumbs-Than-One, he began, and blew his horn as loud as he could, like George. It wasn't quite as loud as George, but it was pretty loud. And then he said, our harbor has the second biggest ice-free whales. I mean fire extinguishers. Theodore got jumbled up with all the things the other tugboats had told him. Their words felt funny in his mouth, like they weren't happy to be there at all. He decided he would shoot out a great spray with his fire hose, just like Foduck. But then he remembered he didn't even have a fire hose. Theodore decided he would wait for the submarine to say something. But the submarine said nothing. Not a word, not a whisper, not a wink. Theodore was sure his welcome had gone all wrong.
This entire scene just makes me laugh. From messing up Northumberland's name, realizing he doesn't have a fire hose, and just tripping on his words is not only hilarious, but adorable to me. Anyway, after unsuccessfully welcoming Northumberland, Theodore heads back to the dock where the tugboats await to hear how it went.
"How did the welcome go?" asked Emily. "What's a sunk marine like?" asked Hank. Theodore hung his head. "Well, a shark, I guess, but I've never really seen anything like him before. And I don't think the welcome went very well. He didn't even seem to notice me." George looked upset. "Did you tell him how big the harbor is?" "Not really," answered Theodore. "What about the whales?" said Emily. "Not exactly," replied Theodore. "What about safety?" asked Foduck. "And about bigness?" shouted George. The tugs all began to talk at once and toot their horns. Each one thought their welcome was the right one. The tugs turned to Theodore to see whose welcome he would choose. Theodore felt very unhappy. He had already tried to do what everyone had told him, and it had gone all wrong.
So Theodore sets off for the Navy Yard again to try and welcome the submarine. And following along behind come Emily and Hank to give Theodore a little help. As they approach even closer to the silent giant, Foduck appears.
The reason Northumberland hasn't said anything, I believe, is because submarines only speak in secret underwater code. Then Foduck made all kinds of sounds with his special equipment. But the submarine still didn't say a word, or a whisper, or even wink. "Thanks for trying anyway," said Theodore. It seemed like there was nothing to be done, when suddenly, much to Theodore's surprise, George rumbled up. "Did you tell him how big things are?" he demanded. "No," admitted Theodore. "He probably wouldn't listen anyway." A little steam escaped from George's stack. Theodore thought he was angry at him, but George turned to the submarine and thundered, "You are being rude to my friend Theodore, Mr. Submarine. Hello?" Then George let out a great blast with his mighty horn that could be heard from one end of the harbor to the other. But the submarine remained as silent as the sea on a sunny day.
And after all the failed attempts to try and welcome Northumberland, the tugs give up and head for home. It looks like some things really aren't meant to be. But, wait. What's that noise?
There was a sound, a kind of groaning, kind of moaning sound. The tugboats slowly turned back to the submarine. It was moving. Then the most surprising thing happened. One sleepy eye blinked open and looked right at the tugboats. The tugs were scared, but fascinated. They slowly floated toward the other end of the great vessel. "Oh, hello there, tugboats," said the submarine, who seemed surprised to have visitors. The tugboats turned to one another in amazement, and it was then that Foduck understood. "We've been speaking to the wrong end," he exclaimed.
You couldn't have looked for his front view before any of this? Shaking my head moment right here. Moving on. So now with the submarine fully wide awake, Theodore then proceeds with his welcome.
"Welcome to our harbor," he said. "I hope you like it here because it's nice." Theodore knew it wasn't the way the other tugboats thought was the right way to welcome, but it was his way. "It's really nice," shouted Hank, as if he had just thought of it. "Well, thank you, tugboats," yawned Northumberland. "What a wonderful welcome indeed." Theodore glanced at the other tugboats who had all come to help him welcome. And suddenly, he knew he had one more thing to say to the submarine. A very important thing. And also because, said Theodore, most of all, this is the friendliest harbor in the whole world. The tugboats smiled big smiles and tooted their horns, and Theodore, well, Theodore smiled the biggest smile of all.
And that concludes Theodore and the Welcome. This one was pretty good. Definitely like the story concept. It's a decent enough moral to help kids understand that sometimes we can't do certain things the way others want us to. Some things we just have to do in our own way. And I'm glad Theodore finally realized that in the end. With that being said, this is another episode where I can very much relate to Theodore on a personal level. I'm sure there's a bunch of us that have had points in our lives where some people have said you have to do things a certain way, but it just doesn't feel right. Apart from all that, though, we're introduced to our new character, Northumberland, who seems like a pretty interesting character. For the music, familiar Theodore themes in and out of some scenes, but I really enjoyed the tunes Graham Shaw used for the Navy Yard. It kinda gave it that ominous, unsettling feeling to it. Overall, I'd give this episode a thumbs up for what it is. Once again, it's just a very nice, laid-back story with a very decent moral. Up next is Theodore the Vegetable.